Good evening, everyone. I want to thank you all for joining us for our monthly history talk tonight. Tonight is an extra special history talk, not just because we're highlighting a new local author, but also because of the true, real story surrounding our local history that inspired it. And especially because of the generosity of Adele Suslick and Aaron Nieto, who have donated the correspondence letters from the two individuals that'll be highlighted tonight. Let me introduce our speaker, Aaron, who is a former writing teacher, art appraiser, and amateur historian who has spent the last decade unraveling a true historical romance hidden in the pages of 100-year-old letters. She lives in Champaign, Illinois with her husband, 2 sons, and a small menagerie of cats. Like her protagonists, Erwin and Eleanor, she prefers a hike through nature over a tea party any old day. Love and Conductivity is her debut novel. Aaron, I'll let you take over.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out. This is the novel in question, Love and Conductivity. What you see up here are the 2 protagonists. This is Eleanor Morgan, heretofore known as Eleanor, and this is Erwin Phipps, heretofore known as Erwin. The novel is about a courtship correspondence that takes place after World War I between the years 1920 and 1923. And I am thrilled to have the opportunity to talk about this locally because it is a story that begins right here in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. And the story of how it came to be was a bit of a real-life adventure for me, so I will start there. As Will said, my background is as a writing teacher and an art appraiser, and I spent probably about 15 years doing art appraisals, which meant that if estate locally was going to be liquidated for sale and they had a large collection of artwork, I was the one who would get the call. And let me tell you, doing that kind of work, there's really never a dull moment, because if you go to a local estate that has a good collection of artwork, it is always fascinating. It's always fascinating, and this community is really just full of fascinating people. Unfortunately, I was kind of meeting them posthumously, but it was very enjoyable work nonetheless. So this story starts in January of 2015. I got a call from the estate handler named Mary Clegg. She was in business with her family to come to a house in Urbana that had belonged to a physicist. And his name was Thomas Erwin Phipps, Jr. And I could tell from the moment that I walked in, it was just one of those fascinating estates. I'd worked on a couple physicists' estates at that point, and those were just among my absolute favorite, and this was no exception. The pictures are how the estate was presented to the public, which is very put together compared to what you walk into when everything is being sorted and organized for the sale. But it was a house that was absolutely full. I found right away that the house belonged to Thomas Erwin Phipps Jr., but it had belonged to his parents. And it was 2 generations of scientists in the house, and they didn't get rid of anything of value. They held on to everything, including a family correspondence that went back to the 19th century. But the entire estate was just an evidence of a family that was interested in everything. Artwork, science, books, just stacks and stacks of books. So I was pretty overwhelmed as as an appraiser walking in. So I was just kind of going from room to room to find the artwork so that I could evaluate that. And Mary, the estate handler, was stationed in the dining room. And they had just brought down some correspondence from the attic. And she was sitting, going through, she had to put eyes on everything. She had to go through all of the boxes that they brought down from the attic. And she was reading a letter, and she just said, I don't know what I'm going to do with these letters. And I said, what do you mean? And she proceeded to read aloud this letter that would have been from Thomas Erwin Phipps' father to the woman who had become his mother. And it just shocked me. I've gone through all of the correspondence at this point. I couldn't tell you exactly which letter it was, just because the nature of the words were just so endearing, so heartfelt, that it seemed like this was a treasure. And Mary, the estate handler, she was sorting everything in the estate into two piles. One to be priced and put for sale, and the other to go into the trash. There was no in-between with this estate. The physicist did not want to be contacted about anything, so it was Mary's discretion. And I just said, Mary, humanity needs this. So I'm sure it was a lot of back and forth on her part, but she decided ultimately to bundle all of the old family correspondence, that was safely in the past, and bundle them for sale in the estate sale. So I went to the estate sale looking for that one letter because I thought, okay, if I can find this letter, then I can learn more about these people, this history, this story. How did he come to write this beautiful letter? So I went to this sale and I picked up, handfuls of bundles of letters and stuffed them in a shopping bag. I was looking for, letters that looked like they were about that age. And had his name somewhere on the envelope. And I got home and I started reading the letters that I got, looking for the one letter, and I realized that they were all like that. Moreover, this was a back and forth correspondence. So this was a correspondence in which both sides were there, which as an appraiser you almost never find in a collection. And to me that truly made it a treasure. The problem was the estate sale was over. And I had what was probably just a small portion of those letters. So that began the journey for me to amass as much as I could post-sale. I really was just compelled to put them in order and make sense of the world that these letters created, that these brilliant, fascinating people shared 100 years ago. Mary, the estate handler, helped me track down some of the buyers of the letters. At that point, they were all dispersed. They were all gone. They had all been sold. Luckily for me, one of the individuals who bought most of the courtship correspondence is on the board of the Champaign County History Museum, Adele Suslick. She's sitting here tonight. Also, Tom Phipps's neighbor, Leslie, had a small portion of letters. And both were very kind to let me transcribe what they had so I could continue on this mad project of putting together this courtship correspondence. Some of the people who bought the letters were actually only interested in the stamps. It's a whole area of collectibles called covers, stamp covers. So the people who bought them just for the stamps were going to throw out the letter that was inside. Once they read it, they thought, oh, we shouldn't be throwing this away. And they brought it back to Mary Clegg, the estate handler, at a subsequent estate sale that she had. So those also ended up with me as well. So bless those buyers. I also, thank you. I also tried to track down as much as I could on eBay, on other dealers that I knew had attended the sale. I scoured eBay and local shops trying to find those things. Here's an example of an eBay auction that I didn't win back in 2015. So they are still out there. They are still out there. Much of, I don't know exactly how much correspondence is still out there, but some of it is still out in the wild. Luckily, ephemera dealers bought up a lot of the family photos, and I was able to track those down and buy them as well. There are 2 photo albums and a shoebox and another box full of family photos, a lot of it contemporary to the story that I was trying to tell, and you'll see some of these photos also in the course of the evening. I had been trying my hand at fiction at the time, and I was working on 2 other manuscripts, but they just fell completely away as I was piecing together this world and imagining the story that it tells. I was able to reach out to Tom Phipps while I still could to share some of what I was transcribing from his father's letters. A lot of them also include some of the experiments that he was working on at the time. He would make little drawings for Eleanor to show her, and he was touched by that. In fact, he had no idea that this correspondence existed, let alone that it was sitting in boxes in his attic. So it was a revelation to him that his parents conducted a courtship correspondence at all. The dive into this correspondence was deep. My intention was to place the correspondence in historical context. I also had to bend it into a satisfying arc, but one that honors the beauty of the story that I found here. So it was kind of a tall order. It took me the better part of 9 years to do that. Taking what I knew to be true from their correspondence and marrying it with what I guessed to be true in between the lines. And it was a joy to live in that world when I was doing that work. And in February of this year, Kohler Books took a chance on it and got published. As you can see, there are hundreds of letters that they wrote to each other. So it, by necessity, had to be very, very condensed into the novel. But just looking at the hundreds of letters that they shared, this is how they got to know each other. And this is how they spent time together. They lived in two separate places geographically, but this is their entire courtship contained in, well, 3 boxes. But I am here first and foremost to talk about these lovely people. This is Thomas Erwin Phipps. He was born in 1895, died in 1990. Mary Eleanor Morgan, born 1895, died in 1967. And heretofore, I'm just going to say Erwin and Eleanor, so I hope there's no confusion about that. These photos are contemporary to their correspondence, so these were taken more or less at the same time that they were writing to each other. This is 1920 to 1923. I thought I might introduce them first by way of their own voices via the first letters that they exchanged, which are included in the book. At the time, Erwin was living in California, and Eleanor was living in North Carolina. They had only met once in passing in December of 1918, so this would have been almost a year previous to their first correspondence. But that meeting, unbeknownst to both of them, was very memorable. February 6th, 1920, Berkeley, California. Dear Miss Morgan, how are you going to know that I sent you a New Year wish already? How are you going to know that I had a New Year wish all ready to send you, but couldn't learn your address in time unless I write and tell you so? I hope you'll play like it's New Year now. You remember about the geese in the rhyme, don't you? One flew east and one flew west. History seems to be repeating itself in our cases. The main difference is the goose that flew east was going home, while the one going west got farther away all the time. Apparently some geese have a better sense of direction than others. Please, if you have time, write and tell me how you are, whether or not you favor Mr. Hoover for our next president. I don't mean to limit you to these topics, but suggest them in a selfish way as things of great interest to me. With very best wishes, I am sincerely yours, Thomas E. Phipps. And Eleanor responds. February 16th, 1920, Goldsboro, North Carolina. Dear Mr. Phipps, your New Year's greetings reached me on the 14th of February, a more interesting date than January 1st, after all. You see, I'm home now on a visit, while my school is closed on account of influenza. The epidemic is worse in Raleigh last year, with a greater number of cases and more distress among the poor. Happily, my hometown is escaping with less violence somehow, and not having had the flu either last year or this, I feel as if I've been cheated out of a universal human experience. Everyone else can discourse about sinking spells and palpitations and hair coming out and fainting, and I am left completely out of the conversation. The implication is that I have the fragile constitution of a Missouri mule. I shall really be glad to go back to Raleigh and begin work. You are finding your work very interesting, aren't you? Your sister used to tell me sometimes about what you were doing, and I envied you beyond measure. Next year, or the year after, or whenever, speaking of Hoover, I shall have Hooverized sufficiently, and I hope to be studying too. California has always had a golden sound to the southerner with wanderlust. You aren't going to tell me its enchantment is only that of distance, are you? I was very glad to get your note, and, well, it's a long time before another New Year's, but there's Easter or 4th of July down the road. Sincerely, Eleanor Morgan. Now that you have her voice to work with, a little bit more about the woman. Mary Eleanor Morgan was born April 21st, 1895 in Yokohama, Japan, where her father, Reverend Alexander Morgan, was doing missionary work. She had 3 older siblings, Martha, born 1881, Newell, 1883, and Lawrence, born 1890. So she was the youngest. Her mother, Catherine Bryan Morgan, married her father after the death of his first wife in 1883. So her 2 eldest siblings are from that marriage, and they soon after sailed for Japan. The family returned to Goldsboro, North Carolina in 1898, so she would have been just 4 years old. But it was in Goldsboro where both sides of Eleanor's family had been rooted for generations, and this is where she grew up. I don't have very many early photos of Eleanor and her childhood and her family, so this is just kind of a postcard of the neighborhood where she grew up in Goldsboro. Oh, I'm sorry. I have one more thing to say back here. By her own account of her girlhood, though, she was steeped in books and poetry, and as a result had a very fanciful nature. This was also nurtured by her mother. But she was also very studious and a student of history, as we can see here. This is from her yearbook at State Normal College in Greensboro, around about 1914. What I love particularly about this is that they choose a line of poetry to describe her, which is, "All that weight of learning, lightly like a flower." And this is a line of Tennyson, who was among her favorite poets. But also they go on to describe her this way: "A little slip of a thing with red-brown hair, that's the Eleanor we see. A woman of letters, a debater, a champion of students' rights, a winner of history prizes. That's the Eleanor we marvel at. A bounteous giver of sympathy and understanding. That's the Eleanor we love." I think that's very, very apt, knowing what I know about Eleanor. Now, after she graduated from State Normal College in Greensboro, she went to the University of Oklahoma in Norman for her graduate studies. And that was no accident, because her older brother Lawrence had accepted a faculty position teaching poetry at Oklahoma University. So she kind of followed him in his wake out there for her own graduate studies. She lived in a boarding house, as was typical for the time for students and faculty that were not from the area. It was very common for them to live in a boarding house, and she was no exception. She lived in one that was hosted by the Brandenburg family that lent rooms particularly to the female faculty of Oklahoma University, which was very fortunate because her roommate turned out to be Helen Phipps. And they developed a very close and dear friendship. Eleanor was quite a bit older, about 12 years older than Eleanor. But they had kind of a very sisterly bond. And it was here that Eleanor met Helen's younger brother, Erwin. As it happened, after Armistice, Erwin was traveling home to Austin from South Carolina, where he had been stationed, and he decided to get off the train at Norman and go to visit Helen for just a few hours before he had to get back on the train to go to Austin, and that turned out to be a very fateful decision for them both. And so the correspondence begins, and Eleanor moves from Norman to take a position at Columbus, Mississippi, at Mississippi State College for Women. This is a calling card of hers that she must have given to Erwin at some point, because this is all his handwriting, trying to keep track of where she is during the time that they're corresponding. Randolph-Macon Women's College in Lynchburg, Virginia. So she kind of did the rounds for a few years as adjunct faculty teaching poetry. Let's turn to Erwin's side of the story. Come on. I have many more pictures of his growing up. Okay, here we have Erwin with his large family. He was born on October 24th, 1895 in Stony Point, Tennessee, to Reverend Jot Phipps and Roe Tadlock Phipps. He had 5 siblings: Peggy, born 1881, Helen, born 1883, Foster, born 1887, Edgar, born 1891, and Kent, born 1901. And here is Erwin, right behind his father's knee. There he is. Now, before Erwin was born, his father also spent time doing missionary work, but he was in Turkey and Greece. When Erwin was a small child, the family moved from Tennessee to Oklahoma, which would have been Indian Territory at the time, and finally settled in Austin around 1908. I'm not quite sure. Their family home was located at 1300 San Jacinto. This would have been right across from the Capitol building in Austin, which if you look up this address now, I'm sure you will see it's just an industrial something. but it's nice to have a little window into the neighborhood that it was at one time. This is Erwin out in the back gardens, about 14 years old. Okay, and now we have his yearbook as well. And I think it's funny looking at the contrast of how he's described, because all this says is Tom, a studious stewed, which maybe that was pretty apt at the time as well. But his sister Peggy had more colorful ways of describing him here in the family photos. She says, a gentleman and the scholar in the making, and oh, how I do hate to have my picture took, with him squinting in the sun. And I use that photo in my story as well. After an education in the classics, Erwin took up chemistry at the University of Texas. He was inspired in that direction by his professor, Eugene Schock. And through his education with Schock, studies of the physical properties of various materials became a lifelong fascination for him. Come on. In the beginning of 1918, the draft came calling. He served basic training at Camp MacArthur in Texas as a private first class, elevated to second lieutenant, and then was battery officer at Camp Jackson. And he was shortly to be sent overseas when he contracted Spanish flu during the epidemic of 1918, and it hit his barracks hard. He was so ill that an erroneous report of his death reached home. He did rally, and just mere weeks after that, armistice was declared. And here we have the postcard that he sent to his father as right before he was coming home, saying, "I was discharged from the service today, and I'm taking advantage of a soldier's rate," which was 2 cents at the time, to come back to Texas, leaving tomorrow, 4 p.m. The rate was open only to the soldier's hometown and for immediate use. I should arrange to stay over at Muskogee for a few days, probably. TEP. Now, his brother Foster was living in Muskogee, which would account for that. So we know that his trip to Norman, Oklahoma to see Helen was kind of a lark and very fateful. After Armistice, he took up his doctoral work at the University of California in Berkeley. He studied under Gilbert Newton Lewis, who was well known for his groundbreaking work in thermodynamics. In Erwin's degree work in physical chemistry, he investigated the electrical conductance of liquid ammonia alkali metal solutions. This is a colleague of his, Roy Newton, who's a minor character in the book. He's in the lab there. Alpha Chi Sigma, which was the honors chemistry fraternity. And here we have, I think that's Erwin on top of the rock. But he would often hike around in the hills behind Berkeley. And I know this because he would write descriptions in his letters to Eleanor. So I like to think he's sitting up there, you know, composing his next letter to her. He did graduate with his PhD in June 1921. In his race for finding the conductance of sodium in ammonia, he was in a race with a Brown University professor who was well known. His name was Charles Krauss. And Erwin dearly, dearly hoped that he would be first to this finish line. And that sort of compelled him throughout his research, and he got the devastating news just before he was going to finish his own work that Charles Krauss had published his. So it kind of robbed Erwin of his laurels a bit. You see, he has to acknowledge Dr. Krauss here at the bottom. The language says, while the investigation was in progress, the recent comprehensive study by Krauss of conductances in liquid ammonia was published, and his results are confirmed at several points by my own, but he had hoped to be the one that published that first. Oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. So fall of 1921, he accepted a position from Dr. Rodebush here at the Department of Chemistry and moved to Urbana. So what does he do but write about his impressions of Urbana to Eleanor? And I'd like to share those with you. This letter is dated October 9th, 1921. At Illinois, most of the buildings are red brick and built around a large rectangle. Champaign bounds us on the west and Urbana on the east. Streetcars going to the center of town, either town, pass right by the Chem Building steps. Champaign is much more of a town than Urbana, boasting several movies and a junior Orpheum circuit. Trees are everywhere, hard maples, sugar maples, hackberries, and elms, which is a very Texan thing to say, with 100 blackbirds, 10 robins, and 2 squirrels to every tree. Squirrels are protected, robins are tolerated, and blackbirds are outlawed. I'm told that people get out in the heart of town with shotguns and try to break up the open-air blackbird camp meetings. I don't think people can do that anymore. Urbana is composite of age and youth, like an orange tree. Some of the streets are paved with old brick, which undulates like the sea and reminds me of Montgomery, Alabama. Many of the streets, though, are beautifully paved with concrete and bitulithic. Sidewalks everywhere are double-lined with fine trees. A month after he wrote this letter, he proposed to Eleanor via letter, of course, and they had still only met once. But she immediately accepted, and their courtship at that point gets very frequent. It had been kind of a slow conversation in fits and starts between them. It sort of became a lot more like a symphony, like they were writing to each other most days. So from his correspondence, he wrote often of the goings-on in Champaign-Urbana, often just in kind of little brushstrokes here and there, cafes that he went to, performances. I'll pull a couple more bits of significant descriptive correspondence here that I can share with you. Now, this is an alma mater unveiling in 1922, which the timing is all wrong because it was dedicated in 1929. I think what he was referring to here was perhaps plaster cast or something at the time. Any alma mater historians here to help? No? Okay. This couldn't have been the bronze that he was referring to, but he said, "Last night I went out to the quadrangle to the final commencement band concert. Yesterday afternoon there was a formal dedication of a statuary group called Alma Mater, a gift, I think, of Lorado Taft, the famous Chicago sculptor and patron of the university. It is to be placed upon the steps in front of the auditorium which occupies the south side of the quadrangle. A goddess of liberty of heroic proportions has just risen from a chair and stands with outstretched arms to welcome the coming generations of students. Behind her, with right hands clasped across the chair, are two heroic figures, a man and a woman, emblematic of those who have come under her beneficent sway, I suppose. Both figures of women are very Roman. Their faces are very severe and masculine, it seems to me. They are draped in togas, if women were togas, and look like the statues one sees of Roman women. The man, poor fellow, is badly deformed. His arms are swollen to outrageous, painful proportions, and he stands quite pigeon-toed and ill at ease, which I would too if the artist should give me an ill-fitting pair of trousers and only a leather apron instead of a shirt and coat." Okay. This isn't exactly Champaign-Urbana history, description of local place, but it is significant in terms of describing an early breakthrough in atomic science, which happened while he was here. "There has been a pleasant stir in chemical circles lately. A professor at Chicago University has recently produced temperatures about 3 times as hot as the sun and approaching that of the highest stars. About 20,000 degrees, he estimates it. That of the sun is about 5,000 or 6,000 degrees. He did it by allowing an electric current at high voltage to be discharged suddenly through a fine tungsten wire in a vacuum. He got a big explosion in 1 or 2 experiments, and in other experiments he found that the tungsten had actually been decomposed into lighter elements. You see, this is very remarkable in itself, for hitherto radium and uranium are the only heavy atoms which decompose spontaneously, however, to give lighter atoms. But the most interesting part is the explosion. It seems likely that he got out of the tungsten a greater energy than he put into it, by far. In other words, the electric current producing the high temperature acted as a trigger to liberate tremendous quantities of intra-atomic energy. And so you see, if this be true, we don't care whether coal and oil do play out. Everything we touch has unbelievable amounts of energy in it, which we may be able to liberate. This may be just a wild dream, but chemists, many of them, are dreaming of it, waiting breathlessly for more accurate experiments which will prove or disprove the results of the first experiment. Strange to say, the hottest stars have only the lighter atoms and none of the heavier ones, which is just as we would expect if high temperatures decompose heavy atoms. The experiment in question was one carried out by Gerald Wendt and Clarence Irion at the University of Chicago. They identified the presence of helium after the explosion of the tungsten wire. Widespread coverage from the experiment produced kind of a negative reaction, however, from the leading chemists of the time. The experiment was repeated, but the results were inconclusive, and Wendt and Irion abandoned their experimentation with exploding wires after that. The results, however, were confirmed 80 years later by researchers at the Khrushchev Institute in Russia. At the very least, it did, in 1922, provide a ripple of inspiration, opening up new doors to what seemed possible, making it plausible that nuclear transmutations can occur. And on a personal note, they got married. And their correspondence ends because they are then living together in Urbana. Okay, after the end, they marry, they have a little family. Tom Phipps Jr. is born in 1925. This is a picture of them around 1930, I believe. Erwin elevated through the ranks at the chem department. I believe he started as a lecturer. He rose to assistant professor, to associate professor, to full professor, kind of in short order. And in 1930, he was awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship to study in the field with the field of, molecular beams. And this was with the world famous Otto Stern in Hamburg, Germany. Otto Stern was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1943, largely for the work that he conducted in 1922 concerning the behavior of magnetized atoms. So for the years of 1930 and 1931, he was in Hamburg. In 1945, he joined Glenn Seaborg's research team at the University of Chicago to assist measuring the vapor pressure of plutonium at high pressures. So he was given 5.5 milligrams of plutonium to be cleaned and transferred to a tantalum container and then into a vacuum apparatus. Measuring the radioactivity through a Geiger counter, Erwin was able to determine how vapor pressure would develop at high temperatures. He considered it some of his best work, and we now recognize this contribution to what came to be known as the Manhattan Project. I believe all he was told at the time was that the information that he could provide would assist in creating a nuclear bomb. And on a lighter note, here is Eleanor and Erwin at Tom's graduation from Harvard in 1944. He doesn't like to smile for the camera. he looks so serious when I know he's not that serious. But he comes across that way, very severe. A little bit about his lasting legacy as a professor of physical chemistry for over 4 decades. He considered chemistry to be a very manual art. He constructed his own apparatus. He blew the glass for all of his experimental equipment, and he instructed his students to do the same. His son Tom related to me that he was known as the last of the glass-blowing chemists. He had such precision and accuracy in his measurements that he earned the name 5-Point Phipps. He He was very generous with his time and knowledge, and he was a very enthusiastic conversationalist. He got a lot of joy out of just talking to people and sharing ideas. He had a love of the natural world, and an understanding of the importance of the complexity of matter, of understanding that complexity, and an approach to the physical world that was both cautious and exacting and respectful and full of awe. He retired in 1964 after Eleanor's health began to fail. She died after a series of strokes in 1967, and he afterwards published a book of her verse, which you see here, and I also have a copy here if anyone wants to take a look. In the 1950s, she took up jewelry making and silver working, and the monogram that you see on the front of the book is taken from one of her silver trays that she made in 1954. And I'd like to read you a verse of hers, because this is also contemporary to the correspondence. She wrote this in 1922, at the same time that she was living in Mississippi and corresponding with Erwin, who would have been in Urbana at the time. A little context, when she was teaching at Mississippi, she was boarding, but this time she was boarding at the home of the department chair, Mr. Painter. And Mr. Painter had a 4-year-old daughter named Mary, and she makes an appearance in this verse. Innocence. Pedagogue sat at her desk, laborious, studious, duteous, penning notes for her lecture, sober, sound, and serious. Subject, songs of innocence. Came a tapping at the door. Not a raven, something more. In stepped, outspoke, innocence herself. I have to eat my supper now. Won't you please take care of my dolly till I'm through? Thank you very much. Her name is Molly. Okay. Moving on to Tom Phipps. I've got some good pictures of him. Circa 1930, this would have been about the time that they were going to Hamburg, or perhaps there already. 1937, he is in the basement at work on a telescope mirror at that time. And he would have just been entering High School, from which he graduated. He attended Harvard on scholarship, where he graduated in 1944 with a Master of Science in 1948 and a PhD in 1951 in nuclear physics. He then worked during 1945 with physicist Philip Morris's Operations Research Group in the Navy Department, which addressed the problem of Nazi U-boats attacks on the transatlantic shipping. He spent 12 years in the Pentagon in systems analysis for the Navy and in research management for the Department of Defense, specializing in molecular beam technology. So he was very much his father's son. He essentially took up the same line of study. In 1980, he retired and moved back to Urbana to form a small private physics lab with his father, in which they experimented in electromagnetism. In 1986, he published Heretical Verities, Mathematical Themes in Physical Description. This book offers, as he put it, alternative thinking on mathematical themes in physical description, which I don't claim to understand. After Erwin's death in 1990, he continued both experimental and theoretical investigations into basic physics and published in 2005 a second book, Old Physics for New, challenging the fundamentals of Einstein's theory of special relativity. Which brings us full circle back to this extraordinary correspondence that started it all. Now that we've been through the world that it contains, or at least dipped our toes into the world that it contains, it will be donated to the Champaign County History Museum by myself and Adele Suslick, who also donated a large portion of these letters. And I've already given away half the book during this talk, but if you're interested, my book is published and widely available. It is, I think the literary has at least one copy. There's a copy on the shelves here. Or you can get it at all online retailers. I've got my website here. I do have more transcribed letters that you're welcome to also check out if you are so inclined, and I intend to put more on there as well. The novel provides a fictional context for the courtship that is outlined by the correspondence. I did use a portion of the actual correspondence, edited heavily, and then just created this world around these two wonderful people. I think that's all I got. I have books here. If anyone would like to actually buy a copy now, I have them here. I have a copy of Eleanor's verse, if anyone is interested in taking a look at that.
Well, at the very least, we can now have any questions. So if anyone has any questions for Erin, we can have those answered now.
Yes, Adele.
This is a statement.
Yes.
I met Erin for the first time at that estate sale.
Mm-hmm.
And as I recall, the letters that were in the dining room had been moved down into the basement. And
Yes.
they were lined up in long rows on a table. And I remember I was reading a letter from Eleanor to her son, who's at Harvard. And
Stand up, stand up.
And this particular letter was fascinating because, like all loving mothers, she was cautioning her son about how he ought to live and what he should be doing, and certainly please keep in touch. So you could tell that she was concerned. And as I was reading this, a lady whom I did not know came up and started looking through the letters too. And it turned out that we both knew that these were historically significant. And I also ran into a couple of letters that indicated that there was involvement in the Manhattan Project. And I knew that this had to be saved. So that's why I bought up a lot of these with the intention of donating them to the Champaign History Museum. And so we have become friends since then and enjoy each other's company. We like old things. Yes.
Hi, Adele. You didn't know that they were Tom Phipps's letters yet, that he went to uni when you saw them, right?
I did not know that.
I knew him. I mean, they lived in our neighborhood. So,
Wow.
yeah, and I met him with my work with uni, so, and he's an alum, so from class of 40, and, yeah, he's a great guy.
You should get that into the alumni newsletter, this book, because
Oh, yeah.
referencing it,
Yeah.
because I think it would mean something to a lot of people.
We just lost in 1940 class, there was one surviving member. Our Nobel Prize winner was in there, and then the guy who helped start the Illini Union, he was the class of 1940. So they were friends, and when Tom moved back to town, he would come to, I would contact him for alumni events. Yeah. Nice guy.
Very nice.
Great contributor to Uni High right there himself. Anyway, just wanted to add that little extra
Yeah.
sliver.
Pretty good.
I'm glad I know Aaron.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I guess I did forget to mention, and I was going to, that I was able to meet with Tom Phipps before he died. I didn't get down to this end of my notes. To say that he was known for his kindness, his wisdom, and his wit, and his keen letter writing ability, just like his father. But I can attest to those things too, because I was able to sit down with him one afternoon and listen to him tell me all about his life and everything that he remembered about his parents, and to give me his blessing to do this crazy project with the letters that he didn't know existed.
One other interesting thing is in this basement was this lab. And,
Adele, that's their house. They
oh,
live
and I was simply fascinated by it. And I'll let you, if you would, talk a little more about it. But I thought, who is this man? And then I found out that it was father and son, and they did all of these experiments together. But they did it in their own home, in the basement. And I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, and we were just talking about that crazy basement that hasn't changed.
The lab is still there. It's not been touched. I mean, we didn't
That's
do
crazy.
anything to it when we moved in.
We thought it was kind of strange.
Yeah.
Why is there a bomb shelter in the corner of this basement? And why are all these
There are jars. Yeah.
labeled with different chemical names? And what do we do with it?
There's an AC, DC converter, and like metal support things might have held a telescope, a microscope. I'm not even sure what this stuff is, but it's still there.
I
There-
can probably hook you up with the people who might have known him. The Brumlevies have passed away, but I think that Tim Brumlevy actually worked with Tom a lot, because they had a chemistry lab on the corner of University and Lincoln. And Brumlevy had that with several other people, but I think he worked with Tom when he moved back to town. And they lived on California, real close.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
There was, this is the one thing we did change in the house, there was a shower head in the middle of the ceiling in the basement. I suppose that they spilled something and we needed to take a
Yeah,
quick shower.
clean up.
But the plumbing and electrical work in the house was,
The lights in the
It was a
basement were
bad-
provided with extension cords.
just a spider
Staple.
bed. So we did clean that. That's the one thing we took out was the shower head. Some of the extension cords.
And we put actual wired-in lights as opposed to, I always thought if my father had seen the extension cord strung across the basement, he would have had a fit. But, you know, I see pictures like this and it's just,
This is your basement.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really small room, the lab. It's not a big.
I might have sold him one of those computers. From 83 to 86, I sold a lot of portable computers like that, and they had green screens to the university faculty. Because U of I was buying, and they were paying full price for them through Computerland, so I started a company with a friend and sold them wholesale. And I carried the 30-pound thing around because they were portable. Pretty cool.
we still get mail to the Phippses.
Oh,
Yeah.
I love that actually.
Any other questions? Well, at the very least, we can have some time to chat afterwards, but at the very least, I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. It's actually interesting that Phipps experimented with telescopes. Our next history talk is actually going to be a student at the University of Illinois who is an intern with us, who did research on the Vermilion River Observatory that was started by the University of Illinois Astronomy Department, which has long since been abandoned and forgotten. That talk will be in October, so look forward to that. And it's hopefully going to be at the observatory at the University of Illinois. We're still fine-tuning some location details, but we'll let you know. All right. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.